I am thrilled to be here. The dollar is our currency, but it is your problem. This single remark is the best introduction to my talk. It was made by Treasury Secretary Connolly to blindsided European counterparts after the unilateral closing of the gold window. And this remark is very relevant to the world today. Decades later, when the world was reeling from the aftershock of the financial crisis, the collapse of Lehman Brothers, Luo Ping, a top financial regulator in China, complained, "We know the dollar is going to depreciate. We hate you guys, but there's nothing much we can do." Except for the US treasuries, there is nothing we can hold. The dollar is the anchor of the global economy, but its efficacy rests on growing inequality and instability. The dollar is dominant in trade invoicing, in debt issuance, in central bank holdings of reserves. And its role rests on its global perception of the dollar as a universal safe asset, which is accepted in settling financial obligations across the globe. At the same time, this dominance raises certain problems. There are weaknesses. There's exorbitant privilege, the unlimited credit line that the US enjoys from the rest of the world, sustainability, the growing imbalances caused by persistent current account deficits of the US, and finally, what's called the global portfolio glut, the insatiable greed and thirst of global banks and asset managers for new frontiers of speculative returns and risk-taking. So what ensures the resilience? And this is the bread and butter of what I do. It's a tightrope act of balancing, on one hand, the elasticity of payments to keep in line with the growing transaction demands. On the other, the discipline of funding. Ensure payments are settled when they fall due. My work engages with this theoretically, empirically, and using a historical lens to embed the financial plumbing in structures of global power. Now, the period of the gold standard, pre-war gold standard, resting on sterling mechanisms, offers important insights. The City of London was the dominant hub of the international financial system, and the Bank of England was the conductor of this international orchestra of financial flows. But there's a key difference. The sterling mechanisms ultimately rested on gold. The limit to international liquidity was the gold reserves with the Bank of England. This imparted a deflationary bias to the economy. Countries which had deficits and had to adjusted by contracting. Okay. With the collapse of the Bretton Woods, the global dollar has been freed of the fetters of gold. The US Fed is not constrained by gold reserves, but only by the willingness of the rest of the world to hold dollars. But this implicates the global dollar in excessive financial expansion. The global dollar is entrenched in a proliferation of cross-border financial flows, and these flows reinforce the global dollar. Now, a lot of the story, a lot of the focus has been on the advanced capitalist countries in the core and the cooperation within them. So we had critical to the gold standard, pre-war gold standard, was the Bank of England's ability to borrow in times of crisis. So in 1890, it borrowed from France, it borrowed from Russia in order to prevent the drain of its reserves when a leading bank was collapsing. The crowning moment for the US Fed was its extraordinary interventions after the global financial crisis and after the pandemic. It revived the financial system. It was able to enlist the top central banks in the advanced core into keeping into official swap lines. It kept the system awash with dollars. A safety net was extended, but access to the safety net is not equal across the globe, across regions, entities. And so my focus has been on the global south, those who are outside the safety net. Economists very charmingly say that these countries are subject to the original sin. This is the compulsion to borrow in dollars in a global currency. Okay. This enmeshes them in global financial cycles linked to dollar, linked to conditions in the US. They're subject to volatile capital flows. They face unfavorable conditions when they borrow. And when funding dries up, they face the brunt of the crisis. The rescue operations, when they come, subserve the goals of Wall Street. They are geared to ensuring these countries repay the debt. And this is financial subordination, which has been key to the resilience of the dollar. And the way it works is this. You have cooperation at the core, which undergirds the dominance of global financial institutions and the global dollar. At the same time, you have financial subordination in the periphery, which renders the periphery vulnerable to capital flows, to fragility and crisis. In response, as a buffer, they stockpile dollars, dollar reserves. And so they're creating elasticity in dollars for the core while exporting the impact of the discipline onto themselves. And this discipline has a historical precedent. So under the gold standard, under British colonial rule, India had a gold exchange standard which tied it to the sterling. There was gunboat diplomacy when the Khedai regime in Egypt in 1882 had defaulted on debt. Gunboats were sent to seize the treasury. Today, we are more civilized. We have technocratic missions armed with the arsenal of financial programming tools, which enforce stringent debt conditionality. It basically constricts policy space, enforces austerity, opening up, and basically creating new grounds for global finance. The mask often slips. So Elliott Capital, a vulture fund, a holdout in the debt renegotiations with Argentina when it defaulted, famously or infamously actually seized an Argentinian naval vessel off the coast of Ghana to collect on its debt from Argentina. So today, or recently, after the freezing of Russia's reserves after the Ukraine war, with the looming debt crisis stalking developing countries, once again, there is a search for new paths for bilateral, regional, and multilateral formations, which are not dependent on financial subordination, as a way to revive and regenerate and revitalize the financial system. A snapshot of the dilemma is in the contrast. Milei's earlier proposal to dollarize Argentina and Lula's call to developing countries to push back against dollar dominance. The dollar has been remarkably resilient, but it has also bred a lot of instability and inequality. We can do better. Thank you.